I did take a class.
Right in the chat.
I did take a class with my bachelor's degree, but
You
and
did?
phonetics was very difficult for me. I related to math a lot because it was very difficult for me.
So I'm just gonna very much go through the basics very quickly, and then we're gonna talk about sources of difficulty for our Spanish students, Spanish speaking students, and how that results in variation. Because I think that phonetics is one of those classes that that everybody needs to take, that every single English teacher should know and should have in the back of their mind, especially if you're in primary levels of teaching English, because and with students from different language backgrounds, which is sometimes the case in the US, you have, a large group with people from different linguistic backgrounds. Some of them don't have English as a base language, right? So then a lot of the times we have different variations or in English pronunciation. So the goal is for us to teach standard English to our students, because that's the English that's gonna give them opportunities, professional opportunities, academic, right? But it's also a goal to recognize that there is variation in terms of how people speak and their accents, and that is quite normal. It's quite normal that everybody speaks English a little bit differently. Like everybody speaks English according to where they were brought up or according to their level of education, right? So even though it's, it's our duty to acknowledge that variation that we have in society and in language, we also want to do our best to teach our students the standard, because the standard is what has prestige in our world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of a lot of decisions are based in terms of how people sound. So having said that, I'm gonna just go really quickly through some key terms in phonetics. I don't really know your background, so I think that maybe some of you could find this challenging. So I'm not quite sure how to approach this. I'm gonna take it as a summary. I'm gonna start from the beginning, and then half of this class I'm gonna dedicate to some of those potential variations that we may have in a second language learner learning English, phonetic variations. Okay, so what is phonetics? From a very basic way. Phonetics is the study of the sounds of languages, so it's a descriptive study. It's not us telling people that they're doing it wrong or that they're pronouncing something wrong, because as we mentioned, everybody has an accent. Everybody sounds different. So phonetics is not interested in prescribing who's right and who's wrong and what sounds nice and what doesn't sound nice. Phonetics is literally just a descriptive study of language. It tells you this is what people do when they speak. This is how they sound. This is what they're doing with their mouth. The study of phonology is related to phonetics. It's specifically the study of how sounds combine, how sounds can combine in a language. It's kind of like the grammar study of phonetics. It studies the sound system. So what encompasses as the sounds of the English language. So the English language has a set of sounds that are unique to English. Spanish has a sets of sounds that are unique to Spanish. Sometimes there's overlap between Spanish phonology and English phonology. Sometimes there isn't, right? But phonology would study or would talk about the system or the repertoire of different sounds for that particular language and how they can combine with one another. So sometimes we can get certain sound combinations in parts of a word, and sometimes that's not allowed in a specific language. So for instance, consonant clusters at the beginning of words like strive, strike, that's quite common in American English. We have that est, r combination, super common in American English. However, you translate that combination into Spanish, it doesn't, it's a lot more challenging for our students to learn that in words like strawberry, how to pronounce that first component of consonants, straw. Why? Because that combination of consonants doesn't exist in Spanish phonology, when I say tema de sonido for Spanish. So, in that sense, that sort of knowledge of what sounds can combine and what sounds cannot, and where can we hear a sound and where it doesn't occur, is knowledge that's discussed under phonology. So for instance, the combination ng at the end of la palabra sing, the word sing, ng. ng, it's a very famous consonant combination that occurs at the end of many different words. And also it occurs in the end of the present progressive verb, ing, ng, it occurs all the time. However, in English, very rare, never would we hear a word start with ng. Doesn't happen. No. So the phonology of English tells us that words cannot start with ng, but they can end with ng, right? So that's knowledge specific to phonology. So in that sense, phonology is related to phonetics because it does talk about sounds, but it talks more about the rules about sounds versus phonetics just talks about how we move our mouth to produce sound. So that's the difference between those two studies. They're very interrelated, but they mean different things. So does that make sense? Did you guys know that? Phonology is to do with the sound system or the rules of how sounds can combine, and phonetics is to do with describing how we produce sounds. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Okay, good. So just going very briefly through that. So different areas covered by phonetics. So a lot of the times when English teachers are concerned with phonetics, we're concerned with the articulatory aspect, meaning that we're concerned with the movements of the tongue in relation to the roof of the mouth, right? So we're interested in what's happening in our mouth. That's the area that concerns us as language educators. Other areas like acoustic phonetics, which is another field of phonetics that looks at the physical mechanisms of sound, studies the physics of sounds in terms of sound waves. That area exists, but it's not for us. It's for the phonetician experts that deal with computer software and analyze sounds a ese nivel, to that level. And then we have people that do auditory phonetics, and those are usually from a more medical inclination. The effect of speech sounds in the ear. So for us, usually it's that first bit, the anatomy of speech or articulatory phonetics, that concerns most English teachers. So you've probably seen this before if you've taken phonetics or introduction to linguistics. So that image there portrays the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is an alphabet devised by expert linguists to stand for all of the different potential sounds of the languages of the world. There are many different potential sounds. For us as English teachers, the International Phonetic Alphabet, while useful and interesting, is not necessarily practical for us. We probably want to look at the a version of the International Phonetic Alphabet that's specified to English. So the English version. So usually when I tell people who want to learn the symbols of phonetics through the internet, I recommend typing English phonology on Wikipedia, por ejemplo. So I'm going to do that now. Because a lot of the times when people learn phonetics, they just type the International Phonetic Alphabet online and they can get confused with a host of symbols que no tienen que ver, have nothing to do with English, right? So this is an English class. So usually, right, if you go to Wikipedia, type English phonology, Wikipedia has the best entries for linguistics, even though it has bad reputation amongst teachers, and teachers will always tell you never cite Wikipedia. It's true, it's pretty bad, anyone can edit it. But for linguistics, it's pretty reputable. And for other areas of like the sciences, like increasingly there have been scholars and professors that log in to edit Wikipedia entries. For instance, in the area of linguistics, the Linguistic Society of America, they host annually a Wikipedia edit-a-thon. O sea, que se meten a editar los Wikipedia entries. So people do revise these entries. So usually you have a nice summary of, you know, everything that you need to know about that area. The same goes with morphology or any other area that we discuss. So here we have IPA symbols specifically for English. And it tells you that for English, there's 24 consonant phonemes. We mentioned very briefly earlier that phonemes are a unit of sound, unidad, it's a unit of sound. So there's 24 different units of consonant sounds in English. And here they gave us them with their phonetic symbols. So let me see if I can zoom in. Here are the symbols that some of you might remember from your previous classes if you've taken phonetics. Only a couple of you responded to that question. So here are the labels adopted up here by phoneticians and down here to classify those sounds. So each individual sound has a corresponding name. What we know as P in our ordinary alphabet speech, P is not called P in phonetics. What is it called? If anyone has taken phonetics, what is P called? If you know how to read this. Okay, pues no saben, bueno, saben o no se acuerdan, no se atreven. All right, so that was a testing question. So, okay, I know what I gotta do. All right, so we don't call PP. That sounds weird. So we call this sound, we call it voiceless, bilabial, produced with my lips, labial, plosive, or stop. Okay, no se asusten because I'm gonna go through these labels again. But it's called voiceless bilabial stop. Ese sonido. All right. So all of that information is found in Wikipedia in this English phonology entry that I'm gonna share with you right now in the chat so you can follow along. My mouse is dead. Tengo que mover. So I have a Mac desktop and my mouse is apparently dead and it needs to be charged. So I'm just gonna give this a minute. So that table that you saw is derived from the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is a lot more thorough and extensive. So it represents the sounds of the world, the sounds of English. So in phonetics, we use various tools to help us talk about language or to analyze language, such as our own alphabet and categories that we've come up with or labels that we've come up with that sound super technical and scary, to talk about the mechanisms of how sounds are produced in the mouth. Those scary terms that you saw in that Wikipedia entry, those are essentially like medical terms that literally tell us that that sound is produced in a particular place in the mouth and in a particular way, con la lengua, with the tongue moving a certain way, or with the lips pursed together and then coming apart. So all of those labels give us that information. So it's very much a speech science, phonetics. So it's useful to have this representation of speech. So it's useful to have our own alphabet, because not all spelling systems are reliable for language learners. So a lot of us here in this class are Spanish speakers. We know that Spanish is pretty faithful to how it's written. So a lot of the times when people talk about Spanish, they call Spanish a phonetic language, because you see the symbol and literally that symbol, it's how it's produced. A is always A. It never has another version of that vowel. E se queda E. A, E, I, O, U. Those are the 5 cardinal vowels. There'll never be versions of those vowels that need an additional symbol, right? So, and most of our consonant sounds have a corresponding symbol, right? Except H, ha. We don't pronounce H in Spanish. So in that case, that consonant's a little bit useless in our spelling system. And then another example of an inconsistency would be in Puerto Rican Spanish, how we very famously omit our final S's, right? But we still use them in writing. So overall, all in all, Spanish is pretty phonetic. English, however, the English spelling system is very challenging, because English has taken from many different languages throughout time. It has taken from Latin, it has taken from French, it has taken from German, right? Plus it has that whole Anglo-Saxon, Celtic background. So to all of that, you add those new influences or those new terms that came with the French Norman conquest, with the Latinate words, right? With German. So then what ends up happening is that sometimes we have more symbols representing one sound, or one sound being represented by different symbols. So in this sense, sometimes when people talk about English, they say that English lacks that sound to letter correlation. Correlation meaning relationship. It lacks that direct linear relationship from symbol to sound that other languages like Spanish and also Finnish. Finnish is apparently a very phonetic language, a good phonetic language, have. So English, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most phonetic, 1 being super obscure alphabet symbol, English is somewhere like, not in the obscure, but it's somewhere like in the middle, going to kind of obscure, because sometimes there's symbols that aren't even pronounced, like the silent E, right? Or we have PH and F standing for the same sound. So because we have all of these different inconsistencies in English, it can be challenging, especially for someone whose first language is not English, to learn how to pronounce English, leading themselves by what's written, right? If they are to base themselves and their learning experience off of what's written, it could be challenging for them, right? So for this reason, phonetics is a very practical tool for English educators, because having knowledge of the articulatory processes or the different movements of the mouth, having knowledge of that super cool symbol alphabet system can allow us to be able to instruct our students if they're pronouncing something wrong, specifically where in the mouth what could they do to make that pronunciation better? Or we could turn our student to a dictionary entry, and dictionary entries oftentimes have the phonetic pronunciation next to the word. And if we're using an online language resource, oftentimes the phonetic pronunciation is hyperlinked. So that means that if you click on it, suena. So there are tools nowadays that could help us teach our students pronunciation of a language, right? But the end idea is that phonetics is very practical for us as language educators, but for many other reasons as well. So having this visual representation of speech, having our own alphabet, means that we have more accurate symbols than what is in existence in English language. So any questions so far about the IPA? No, but we're gonna turn to it again. But so far of that mini discussion. All right. So now we're gonna talk about the anatomy of speech, or how speech sounds are produced. So usually when people talk about consonants in English, we talk about different ways that we can classify these consonants. One second. How can I stop sharing? One second. I'm those names. And the reason why we adopt more precise names to talk about a sound is because spelling is an invention of mankind, right? So for spelling, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with actual sound production. So we have a host of different categories or labels that have been devised in linguistics to talk about sounds. So I'm in the English phonology Wikipedia entry. So we have different labels to talk about consonants. So usually the way that we classify consonants is according to three important aspects. The first aspect is what I mentioned before, the state of my vocal folds. Is it open or is it closed? If it's open, then that means that the sound is voiceless. So the air is coming out through a relatively free passage. If it's closed, the sounds are called voiced, right? So that's one of the main categories that we use to classify consonants. But then another way that we classify consonants is by talking about but we also talk about the place of articulation. Place of articulation means the place where our tongue or our lips come into contact or not, where they come into contact to produce sound. So it's the precise place where the sound is taking place. And then another label that we use to classify consonant sounds is a label that stands for the gestures or the manner in which our articulators or the parts of our mouth are moving. That's called manner of articulation. How our tongue and lips move to form different gestures. So these are the three categories or the three labels, main labels that we use to classify consonants or to talk about consonants. Okay, so we talk about them in terms of whether my sound is voiceless or voiced, where the sound is taking place, and how is the sound being produced. Okay, so having this in mind, voicing, place of articulation, manner of articulation, we go back to the Wikipedia entry. So in this table that's based on the International Phonetic Alphabet, we have information of the place of articulation in each column. Here in your x-axis, this is the places, the different places of articulation, the different places where I can produce consonants. And here in my y-axis, I have information of the manner that I can produce the sounds, the manner that my lips and my tongue move, right? And then here are the actual sounds of English or the consonants of English. So if we were to talk about the names that we give to each sound, so also known as M in spelling, we would call it voiced, bilabial, because it's in the lips, and nasal, because the manner in which we produce it is with the nose. So the air quality comes out through the nasal cavity. So each and every one of these sounds has its own formal name. And that's how people that study sounds talk about those names, like B, D, they all have these large technical formal names. And it's useful because it gives us information of how the sounds are actually produced. So to produce the consonants B, T, K, S, the vocal tract needs to be obstructed in some way. That's key to determining the difference between consonants and vowels. Consonants are produced with a type of obstruction that occurs in my mouth. Vowels are more open in articulation. So consonants, we said, are classified in terms of voicing and in terms of the place and manner of obstruction or articulation. So the primary cause of consonantal obstruction for most languages is the outcome of the movement of my lips and my tongue. And the tongue tip is a specific region in your tongue The blade is another region in the tongue, and the back of the tongue. Okay. So all of these are different regions. 2, 3, and 4 are different regions of my tongue and my lips. So essentially, the primary cause of consonantal obstruction is my lips and different regions in my tongue. So with those different movements of my lips and my tongue, I get a host of different consonant sounds. So firstly, we talk about consonants in terms of the place of obstruction or the place of articulation, el lugar de articulación. So some consonants are labial or bilabial. That means that the obstruction takes place with my lips. So sounds that involve both of my lips, b and p, both of them are bilabial sounds, as well as which is also a nasal sound, but it's bilabial in place of articulation, because when I produce both of my lips are close together, versus as in nose, for my lips aren't close together. So in nose is not bilabial, but p, b, and m are called bilabial sounds. Labial dental sounds are the sounds that involve my top teeth and my bottom lip. So sounds like and those involve my top teeth and my bottom lip, as in father, vine, right? So both of these sounds are sometimes collectively called labial, labial, because they involve my lip in some way. But the first category involves both lips, whereas the second category involves the bottom lip and my upper teeth. So sounds in bilabial, sounds in labial dental, and okay? So made with lower lip and upper front teeth. Then we have consonant sounds that are classified as dental. So that means that they use my teeth in some way. So we said, for instance, that the famous TH that doesn't exist in Spanish is a dental sound. So one of them is produced with my tongue between both of my teeth. That one is called interdental. It's between teeth, entre diente, interdental. Thigh is interdental, between teeth. Thy, in thy, my tongue is behind my teeth. So thy is dental, thigh is interdental. So these sounds involve the tip, the outmost part of my tongue being behind my teeth or between my teeth. Then we have what is known as alveolar sounds. This is a new term that maybe some of you have never heard of before. Alveolar, as a term, alveolar, refers to this region here. It's kind of like a slope in my mouth, that region. It's directly behind my teeth. Alveolar is here. So if you were to feel your tongue move from your teeth to directly behind it, you would feel that slope. That region is called the alveolar ridge. Let me see if I can write that down. Está para dibujar. That region is here. It's called the alveolar ridge. Come on, bridge. That's how I associate it, because it's like a bridge between your teeth and another region that's behind your alveolar ridge. That is a bonier structure. The alveolar ridge is kind of like a soft structure. But if you bring it back, you continue bringing it back to the middle of the roof of your mouth, you'll reach a bony structure called the hard palate. A bony structure called the hard palate. So here we have the teeth is an important region in charge of sound production. The alveolar ridge, an important region in charge of sound production, and the hard palate as well. And the tongue moves variably to approach different regions of the roof of your mouth. So sounds that touch this region are called alveolar sounds, the sounds that touch the alveolar ridge. There are many sounds in the English language that are produced with your tongue approaching that slope, that region. Sounds like d, s, z, l. So everybody unmute yourself and on a count of 3, produce those first consonants with me. Okay, so everybody on mute. Okay, on the count of 3, we're gonna focus on the first consonant sounds for each and focus on the position of our tongue in relation to the roof of our mouth. So let's go. 1, 2, 3. Sa. Sa. La. Again. 1, 2, 3. So do you feel that region? Have you ever thought about that region that's behind your teeth?
Because now with memes like coming up out of nowhere every single day, you know the meme with Bugs Bunny when he says no very, very big. I do that with my students and I tend to like emphasize that N, and I always feel that area there. And at times I'm like, oh, it's kind of swollen. So it's kind of, I've never thought of it. And now with the meme and I try to mimic what's like fun online, I'm aware of things I wasn't thinking, I wasn't, aware of before.
A meme of no.
Sí, el de Bugs Bunny, he's like, no.
Yeah. So that's a either sound. Yeah. So like, I think that usually we notice that region when we're sucking on a lollipop. Okay, we're like in that region sometimes, right? And if we've hurt that region, if we eat something sour and that region is sore, we feel it, right? And it hurts. So that's directly behind our teeth, alveolar ridge. And we have many sounds that are produced with our tongue approaching that region, right? All right, so do you guys want to do the dental then on the count of 3 as well? Do the TH here and the TH here because they're different. So it's important that you know those differences. That it. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
The.
Yeah, so there's variation in those THs that I just heard. So
Okay, sir. I'm sorry for interrupting. I laugh at this because once a kid asked me about how I don't know if I'm gonna do it again. If the word third, it was lo voy a decir en español porque lo digo en inglés, creo que lo voy a decir mal. Eh, I did the sound for the word TURD instead of the THIRD.
RTR, ¿qué? There's somebody talking as well. Huh?
I made the sound in class of the word TURD instead of the THIRD. And
Okay, boy.
kid told in very loudly, La maestra dijo mo-" I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So that means that you maybe like you had difficulty in that moment with the TH. that
I
you
do
couldn't
have,
remember.
I'm not an English teacher. I'm just learning because I'm a special educator and some, for 3 years, I had to teach English to my self-contained classroom. I'm the weakest link here. So I'm here to
No, it's important to know about like variation in language for special education because the whole field is about that. It's about dealing with people with different backgrounds in language that may need help.
Professor, there seems to be somebody that has either a radio or a TV, and I can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've noticed that as well. I just needed to stop sharing because for some reason Zoom, if I want to draw, if I want to stop sharing, it's taking off the menu abajo, so I can't do everything. Like if I stop doing something, I don't know. Let me check to see. But I was noticing that as well. No me deja hacerlo. Anyway, I don't hear anything now. Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So yeah, so that TH versus T interference is something that happens in a lot of Spanish students and teachers, a lot of speakers of English in Puerto Rico, because the English that we speak most of the time, for a lot of us that have lived on the island and our main language is Spanish or our first language is Spanish, or even bilinguals, the English that we speak has usually a type of accent. Now, some people, when they speak English, they sound more standard. That's because they probably made the effort, not necessarily the effort, but maybe they were socialized from an earlier age in a school or in an environment that was conducive to that. But actually, even those people as well could have their own accents too. Because at the end of the day, for a lot of us in this classroom, our English acquisition is taking place in this particular context. But if you're somewhere else, like in the States, your English acquisition and your socializing into learning English takes place in a specific region or state. So usually whatever you sound like is a reflection of that, of your region or your life circumstances. So the standard is like this target. It's an ideological target for everyone, because in reality, there's a lot of different accents in the United States and in Puerto Rico as well. There's many people that speak English differently. So there's many different accents of English as well around the world, right? English is one of the most spoken languages and the most spoken second language in the world. And there's more second and third speakers of English than there are native speakers of English. So that means that in reality, there's many different versions of English. There's a lot of variation. So that's, you know, that's something that tends to happen to people with Spanish, that TH with T. In that particular example that you shared, well, it resulted in like you maybe producing an undesired word, maybe a moment of miscommunication there. So whenever that happens, that's why it's important to like learn about phonetics, because we want to be able to succeed in communicating our thoughts, right? But it's completely normal and human all the time. People mix around sounds, so don't feel bad about that. That's very normal. So those are dental sounds, as well as T is a dental sound, T and TH. Sorry, aquí dice T is alveolar. Let me go back. Ugh. So T is behind your teeth. It's here, alveolar, and TH, the and the is dental. T is near your teeth, but it's in the alveolar ridge. That's important. And then our R sound, our R in English, is kind of unique in terms of where it takes place in our mouth, because it doesn't necessarily take place in a specific region. It's not that my tongue is specifically touching a part. If you do R and rai or ray, your tongue is doing this kind of curled up movement towards an area that appears to be the alveolar ridge. So we could, in theory, call the R sound alveolar. R is alveolar. But we also call these sounds retroflex. R, rai, ro, and ray, because they take place somewhere along the way towards the alveolar. So like here, R. So it's made with the tongue tip and the alveolar ridge. So this bit of my tongue is approaching this area, R, and staying there. Speakers who pronounce R at the end of words may also have retroflex sounds with the tip of the tongue raised in ire, hour, and air. So this for air, ire, and hour, that's also a retroflex sound in standard American English. Now, there are dialects of English that have this R sound and produce it differently. For instance, Scottish English would have a rougher R, rai, ro, re, right? But standard general American English has the retroflex. So then another place of articulation besides the alveolar ridge that we said is here in that slope would be behind the alveolar ridge. So let me see if I can draw eyes. So if this is my mouth, my oral cavity, these are my lips, these are my teeth, this is my tongue. Here we said is the famous alveolar ridge where many sounds are produced. I lost my mouse. Okay. I mean, there's gotta be a better drawing than that. So. So if you go vocal tract, place of articulation, Google Images, this is what we're talking about. So lips, teeth, alveolar ridge here. And then after your alveolar ridge, this is the post-alveolar region. Post meaning is after the alveolar ridge. Post. And then after post-alveolar region, we have the hard palate region, also called palatal, el paladar. So the hard palate region, if you bring your tongue to that region in the center, you should feel a bony structure. So some sounds are produced there with the middle of your tongue, the center of your tongue against that area. And then following that area, let's see if we have a better version. So lips, teeth, can you see that? Let me see if I can click on it. It gets bigger. So lips, teeth, alveolar ridge, post-alveolar, and then hard palate up here. Paladar. After the hard palate, there's a region here called the velum, which is soft. So this is a bony structure. So if you bring your tongue from this bony structure to the back, it should get soft. And this is the soft palate, also called the velum. So these are different regions in the roof of your mouth or the upper part of your vocal tract. So your tongue interacts with different parts of the roof of your mouth to make different sounds. And remember, we said this is the pharynx wall, the pharynx cavity. And down here are the vocal folds. You see, are represented así, with the little squiggly line. So we're in post-alveolar territory now, so let's go back to our discussion of consonants. So after the alveolar ridge, post-alveolar, what sounds are produced there? Post-alveolar, also known as palato-alveolar, between the hard palate and the alveolar ridge, post-alveolar, palatal-alveolar. Sounds that are produced there, shh, as in shy, she, show, shh. So if you do that sound out loud in the count of 3, shh. So I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself to do that sound. And then do an S sound. So first the sh. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Then a so for the first one, you'll notice that not only is there a difference in quality that, you know, can't be necessarily captured by place of articulation, but we probably need another label to talk about something else that's happening there. But shh takes place more behind than s. S. It's towards our teeth in that alveolar ridge. S. But shh is noticeably behind. So it's post-alveolar, palatal alveolar. It's one of the few sounds that occurs in that unique region, i.e. between the hard palate and between the alveolar ridge. Shh. So palatal alveolar, behind the alveolar. Palatal alveolar. And then we have the hard palate region here. It's here between palatal and velar. Sorry, it's here in hard palate, also called palatal. Sounds like you. That sound is produced with my tongue approaching the hard palate. It doesn't touch it, but the region is the hard palate. So on the count of 3, if you do yes slowly, you'll feel it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the count of, or you can just say it.
Yeah.
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 You.
You.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, gracias.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's thank you. Yeah, so that's a hard palate sound. So that's behind your post-alveolar region in the bony structure. Yeah. Again, there aren't
Rosa Julia.
somebody
Ajá.
to mute. One second. There aren't that many sounds that are palatal. U is one of them. As the same way that there aren't that many sounds that are palatal alveolar. Sh is one of them. The largest categories for place of articulation are alveolar, dental, and we're gonna talk about the next one very soon, velar. So palatal is produced by raising the front of the tongue. It's like a region here towards the hard palate. Then we have velar. Velar is in the back of your mouth. Velar is also known as the soft palate, because if you're able to bring your tongue back over there, you'll notice that it's actually a lot different in how it feels than the center of the roof of your mouth. So sounds that are produced with my tongue approaching the back of the roof of the mouth, the velar region, involve k, g, and ng. Those sounds are called velar sounds because my tongue is approaching or touching that velar region. K, g, and So on a count of 3, everyone read that list of sounds. Under velar, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Hack.
Very good. So it's good and so all of that is here. Ayatra. So sometimes there's variation in American English with words that end in ng. There are certain dialects and certain people when they speak English colloquially, sometimes words that end in ng or specifically ing, sometimes words that end in ing are simplified or produced as in. So instead of hanging, people will say hanging. It's like hanging out, right? Playing or playing, right? So sometimes that G is reduced, so we have an IN. So there's a lot of colloquial variation, a lot of the times that involve NG or ING. All right, so those are velar sounds or velar consonants. So they're produced with the back of the tongue and the soft palate. And then we can just skip through that. So summary, different places of articulation are places where our tongue moves to touch or obstruct the airstream in some way or form. Remember, there are different places or locations that our tongue tries to obstruct air or our lips obstruct air. You can think about the beginning sound of each word to remember these places. So, fee, what does fee involve? Fee. What is happening? Where is the obstruction for fee?
Labiodental.
Exacto, labiodento. Theme, where is that obstruction?
Dental.
Yeah, dental, between teeth, interdental.
Interdental.
C,
Alveolar.
Alveolar.
alveolar. And then the last one is after alveolar. Shh. Post-alveolar or palatal alveolar. So labiodental, dental, alveolar, palatal alveolar, or post-alveolar. It's the same thing. And then we also learned terms to do with voicing. Are they voiced or are they voiceless? In which case I said you can try touching this part. And then, is there any vibrating quality to any of the sounds? No. So all of those sounds are voiceless.
Voiceless.
Those examples are voiceless. So my vocal folds are open. So far we've discussed labels for places of articulation and voicing. So I want to go to your CC now. Canvas site. So you have access to this chapter. So this is uploaded in your Canvas site. Module 3 reading. Here's some of the consonant sounds that we discussed. You notice that they gave us some symbols from the International Phonetic Alphabet, right? And the first section, articulatory phonetics, has that drawing that we just showed you. So that drawing that talks about the different places of articulation. So you have your lips, your teeth, the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, the soft palate, and this is the tongue. The pharynx here, this region near the vocal folds called the glottis, right? So those are the 8 places highlighted for us. And then this is, again, this is in your, in Canvas for this reading, for the reading of this week. So this is page 196. It talks about the places of articulation. So bilabials, labiodental, interdental, the list of alveolar sounds, to the z, sounds that are produced in that region. Palatal sounds, we discussed this sound, shh, but there's a list of more sounds that we're gonna discuss soon. Velars, uvular sounds, you don't need to know these because uvular, these sounds do not occur in English. Uvular sounds are like with a little appendage, the one that you see when you open your mouth and you see like that little thing. That's the uvula. So yeah, uvula.
Is that why in Arab, for example, when you have an H, it's like Ahmed, the way that they actually pronounce it, rather than Ahmed.
Yeah, so they have uvular sounds. We actually, in Puerto Rican Spanish, we have uvular sounds. So in rural regions, la palabra perro, double R, we produce it acá, ¿verdad? Pejo, some people. Yeah, arro, ajo. Those are uvular sounds. But in English, it's not common. There's another place of articulation that we didn't get to discuss called glottal. Let's go back to here. So glottal would take place here in the glottis, near the vocal folds. Acá, vocal fold region. So glottal sounds in English, they're not that many. Ha, as in hello, ha, ha. The obstruction is not taking place in your mouth, if you see. Your tongue is not doing anything anywhere here. Your lips are not doing anything. The obstruction in ha, in hello, is occurring here with your vocal folds. Okay, so it's called a glottal sound. Ha, it's open. There's some slight closing, so we hear it, right? But the sound is produced here. And then that question mark, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. It won't let me zoom in, but if I download it, I can zoom in. Again, this is in your chapter for this week. So if you've never seen that symbol before, it looks like an upside down question mark. So that symbol stands for an audible pause. Audible meaning una pausa que se escucha. So sometimes in words, in the English language, we pause inside of a word as if that pause was a consonant. Pauses or in words are produced here in your glottis. So for instance, compound words like fitness, fit, hay como un hiccup there, fitness, background. So in compound words, we get a lot of glottal sounds in between to mark that small pause. Sometimes as well in phrases of longer streams of speech, for example, if we have the word flee, as in leaving, flee, east, I'm leaving east, I'm fleeing east, flee, east. If we have a word that ends in a vowel and then the next word starts with a vowel, a lot of the times when we produce sound, we produce a glottal between those two. We don't carry the vowel to the next word because then it would create the impression that we're talking about a word called fleeced, right? But we pause between it, flee, east. Another example of when we use audible release or that question mark symbol are in words like, oh, ahí hay una pausa, oh, and or ¿verdad? There's audible releases. So that is actually a consonant sound. There's a mini obstruction, pause here. So it's not a very common sound, but it does occur in English. In certain dialects of English, like Cockney English in the United Kingdom, Cockney English is a variety spoken by working class, traditionally working class people in London. So they would produce T sounds that are intervocalic or between vowels, like T sounds like in bottle. Instead of saying bottle, which is standard English for the United Kingdom, they say bottle. They produce the T. Instead of saying bottle, people from Cockney English say bottle. Instead of saying button, people from that English say button, right? So there are certain dialects of English that use this glottal to substitute T, the T. So it occurs in dialects as well. But here we have, see, the interjection, and it has two glottals. One at the beginning, before the actual vowel, and then we release it, oh, that's a glottal sound. So we've spoken about place of articulation and manner of articulation. So I'm gonna see if we can do like a little small exercise on that. So right, so I'm gonna share this with you. So far, we've discussed column 1 and column 2. So forget about 3, 4, and 5, but Column 1 talks about whether a sound is produced with your vocal folds open or closed, voiced or voiceless. And column 2 talks about where it takes place according to the labels that we discussed. So as I mentioned, your book has the labels for place of articulation. So I want you to use that chapter that you have in Canvas to help you answer columns 1 and 2. So you label whether the sound is voiceless or voiced, and you label the place of articulation according to the labels of place of articulation in that chapter. So you do it for these consonants. Okay, so use the book to help you with these 2 columns, 1 and 2, for the consonants, all right? So I'm gonna give you around 5 to 8 minutes to do that because that shouldn't take that long. So do that now, okay? I'll be back. Are we done? Yes. All right. Oh, you'll never be asked to memorize these because, you know, this is not that kind of class. So obviously, like, if you have a quiz on it, you'll have enough time to consult the book. So if it asks you, is this voiced or voiceless, place of articulation, because these terms, you know, they form classes of introduction to linguistics, and whenever people talk about the structure of language, it's important to be familiar with the terms. And as well, you know, sometimes when there's variation in language, certain variations are the result of people producing a sound because their tongue is touching a particular region and it changes to another region. So, can you hear me? It says that my internet connection is unstable. If ever you can hear me, please write it in the chat. Okay, all right, so because you consulted the book, you will know that k, which occurs here, back here, it's a velar sound for kite. Velar takes place here. In terms of whether it's voiced or voiceless, has a puff of air, so it's voiceless. Has my tongue touching that region that's behind my teeth? Like the meme, no. So what is it?
Alveolar.
Acto. So it's alveolar.
Voiced.
And it's voiced. That means that something's happening here, an obstruction here.
Labial dental.
Acto, labial dental. That one's quite easy because it's intuitive, the name. Lips and teeth. In terms of voicing,
Voiceless.
Voiceless.
yeah, it's voiceless. Oh,
Alveolar.
alveolar.
Voice.
And actually, something that would be useful for you to know is that in English, and you probably know this, but in English has two little sounds, two laterals. One of them is the standard one, the one that occurs in most positions, which is alveolar, L, as in lie, or lips. But sometimes the position of my L, of my tongue against the roof of my mouth, can change. So for instance, if I'm talking about a L that occurs at the end of a word, like in pool, my tongue could be a little bit more back for that pool. And that little sound, that lateral sound, is called dark. Pool versus light L that occurs at the beginning of a word. Lie. Pool, lie. So the position of my tongue for both of them is different. So that difference sometimes is missed by our students of Spanish because the alveolar L is the one that occurs the most, no? So maybe pool would be pool, right? So U is voiced. T.
Alveolar.
Velar.
Yeah. Is it voiceless or voiced?
Voiceless.
Voiced. I was voiced.
Okay, so far, voicing helps us make sense of consonants and the place of obstruction, place of articulation. So now we're gonna talk about manner of articulation. Manner, we said, is a term that's used to talk about gestures. What is a manner of articulation? So we make sense of sounds in terms of place and movement. Manner has to do with movement. What movements are the ones that are being done by our articulators? What are the gestures? How are they interacting? There are different movements involved in the articulation of sounds. They could involve the oral tract closed by an articulator, by the tongue or the lips, for a short or long period. Sometimes some sounds involve complete closure, and other times it's a temporary closure and release, like in puh. My lips are coming together temporarily and then being released, puh, right? Versus it's a long period in which my lips are closed together and blocking air. But the air is coming out through my nose, but it's completely blocked from my mouth, right? So in that sense, we can talk about different movements. As well, when we talk about manner of articulation, we can talk about the space being created by our mouth. Sometimes it's more open, other times it's more small, narrow. So for instance, when we produce sounds like w, as in wise, our articulators are coming together, forming a kind of circle, and then coming apart, wise. So it's a much more open consonant, wise, versus if we were to compare the movement there to the movement in sigh, our tongue is towards the alveolar ridge and it's creating this narrow passage. My tongue is not touching my alveolar ridge for in Stephanie or in sigh, it's not touching it. Otherwise, that's an N, that's a nasal. Our tongue is approaching it and it's leaving a narrow passage. And that narrow passage is creating a hissing quality, a sound that is like hissing, like a deflating balloon. So in that case, our articulators are narrow. They are not open, they are narrow, and we have that hissing quality. So manners of articulation would talk about that. Manners of articulation could also talk about how articulators may modify the shape of the tract by simply approaching each other. So by simple approach, it doesn't need to be a complete touch like for p or b or that my lips are coming together and obstructing air. It doesn't need to be coming together, forming the narrow passage. Sometimes it could be just coming almost together like whoa. And by that simple form of simply approaching, even though it's not touching, it's not narrow, we're still obstructing air. So those are different movements of our articulators, short and long, open or narrow, and it could be simply approaching and not necessarily touching or obstructing air. So in terms of the categories that we have for manners of articulation, the first category, and probably one of the biggest, is stop. Stop as in pare. If you consider what that word means, it means that there's a temporary blockage of air or the airstream. It represents the complete closure of articulators. So it's definitely touching so that the airstream cannot escape through the mouth. That's what a stop is. Our articulators coming together, obstructing air for a long or a short period of time. Obstructing, stopping air. There are two types of stops. So we usually talk about stops most popularly happening in our mouth, like oral stops. Oral stops, some examples are as in kite. There's a blockage here of air in my velum. As in tie, a blockage in my alveolar ridge. As in pie, the stop is in my lips. B as in buy, stop is in my lips. So all of those, they are stops. There's a temporary blockage and release. Then we have another category of stops known as nasal stops. Nasals are quite interesting because essentially what's happening when we produce sounds that are nasal, que son nasales, is that there's a part in the roof of our mouth that we mentioned as the soft palate, the velum. ¿Se acuerdan del velum? The velum is in the back, the velum. The velum has an appendage. So imagine if this is the teeth, this is the ridge, this is the roof of your mouth. And there's like a bit here. So this is teeth. This is
Professor,
alveolar
I'm
ridge.
s- Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're breaking up.
Okay. Can you, let me see something. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, but at times it goes on and off.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's just, I think it's the internet connection in general, because here it's raining too, so it's lagging.
Today I woke up and the internet was gone. So I have a backup. So I'm like between back and forth. In any event, I also have recordings explaining this. So I can also share those. Okay, so teeth, alveolar ridge. This is the palate, el paladar, hard palate. And we said here, soft palate, or the velum, where we get those velar sounds, remember? Está allá atrás. So there's an appendage here. Esta cosita, esa cosa, it moves. Okay? So this is the lower end of your vocal tract where your tongue is. Okay? And here's the pharynx wall. This is the back of your mouth, the pharynx wall. And up here is the nose, la nariz, right? So this here moves. Sometimes it's pressed against the pharynx wall. If this is upward towards the pharynx wall, that means that your nasal cavity is shut down, it's closed. When this is pressed against the pharynx wall, So the air is coming out through your mouth. So whenever you produce an oral sound, this is raised against this so that the air comes out through your mouth. However, the way that all of you are right now with your mouth closed, right now, the soft palate, the velum, the appendage is relaxed, it's lowered. That means that as you breathe, this is down, so the air is escaping through the nose and coming back through the nose, right? So whenever we produce a nasal sound, nasal sounds are produced when the appendage of the velum is lowered, like right now, as you're breathing, when it's lowered so that the air can escape through the nose. Okay, so sounds like they are produced with the velum lowered so that the air comes out through the nose. So, sounds like are produced with the velum against the pharynx wall, blocking the nasal cavity so the air comes out through the mouth. So essentially, that's why we have two categories of stops. One of them is oral, so the blockage is occurring here according to the movements of your tongue and your lips. And the other one is nasal. So nasal sounds they could have movements in your mouth that alter the sound. So for instance, even though and are nasals, meaning that the air is coming out through my nose, stuff is happening in my mouth anyway. So has my tongue against the alveolar ridge. Have my lips together. So there are movements happening even though there is no air escaping my mouth. There are movements happening in my mouth that are impacting the quality of that nasal stop. So oral stop, nasal stops. Does that make sense? There's a complete blockage for both of them. For and for k, t, p, b. If you notice, for and the blockage is longer. Your lips are pressed together for long, and as well. But for k, t, p, it's shorter. So stops. So oral stop happens when the soft palate is raised so that the nasal tract is blocked off. The mouth is closed, or the air coming out from the mouth is being obstructed in some way. So some way, teeth, lips, for p, m, sorry, p, d, t, right, b. The air pressure in the mouth will build up for p, t, k. And then when the articulators come apart, there's a small burst of air. So usually, you know, a good indicator that something is an oral stop is you put a piece of paper in front of your mouth and you see it move, like p and b, b. P and b are interesting because p and pi and b and bi, they're both bilabial in the same place of articulation. And they're both bilabial stops because my lips are coming together and then coming apart. But their difference lies in voicing, right? P is voiceless, B is voiced. So sometimes when we say that a sound is voiceless, a sound that is voiceless has a longer plosive puff of air. So the burst of air for a voiceless sound is more noticeable. Like, pie, el papel se mueve más por, a ver si se ve. Pie, pie, se mueve más el papel. But for bye, even though it's vibrating and there's a small burst of air, bye, 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 el papel no se mueve. Bye, se mueve. Bye, no se mueve casi. So both of them are stops, produced the same way, but one of them has more of a burst of air than the other. Both of them have bursts of airs, but one of them has more than the other, and the one that has more is the voiceless sound. So these are oral stops. Pie and bye, bilabial. So that means that they both use my lips. Aquí, my lip one. Aquí, teeth, bottom teeth, and my lip. Tie and dye are both alveolar. Even though they're both alveolar, they're also stops. So they obstruct air as well. Chi and guy, they're velar. Aquí. And they are also stops. They also temporarily stop air. Oral stops or stops that occur in the mouth are called plosives. They have that puff of air quality to them. Does that make sense? Again, all this terminology, these names are in the chapter. Chapter 5 says stops, descripción. So a nasal stop occurs in my. When the lips are coming together and blocking the air, there's a bilabial closure. Nine, when my tongue is touching the alveolar ridge, it's blocking the air. Sang, when the back of my tongue is against my velum, ing. So there's a blockage there. And then the air is coming out through my nose. So those are nasal stops. A lot of the times people don't just say nasals. They call them nasals. So for all of these different sounds, bilabial, alveolar, velar, nasal stops, the air is stopped in the oral cavity, but the soft palate is down, as it is now as you're breathing with your mouth closed, so that the air goes out through the nose. Sale por la nariz. Bi and nine both share the fact that they're stops. The consonants are produced similarly. They're both stops, b and n, but the difference lies in what's happening here in the velum. For one of them, right, the velum is lower, and for the other one, it's towards the pharynx wall. So even though they're both stops, the position of the velum is different. As I mentioned before, most of the time, people call nasal stops nasals. The oral stops stops, but they're both stops. It's just that one of them is oral and the other one's nasal. In some, stop is used to talk about temporary prevention of air. Then the second category that talks about movement is the term fricative, which is a very funny term in my opinion. So maybe some of you have heard the word fricative before. I think about frication. So fricatives are fun because fricatives are essentially the sounds that sound like a hissing quality, like a deflating balloon. So if you think about it, sounds that are like hissing are produced because there's a narrow passage. So you can think about a hallway that's narrow and hurricane winds, right? A hissing quality, a whooshing. So fricatives are described as the close approximation of parts of your mouth. So articulators coming together like the tongue towards the roof of my mouth very closely, and there's a narrow passage, and this narrow passage is creating a turbulent airstream or a turbulent airflow. So that's what a fricative is. It's characterized by the hissing quality or the turbulent airflow. And there are several sounds that are classified as fricatives. We have, in place of articulation, fi and vi. Both of them are fricatives. Those are not stops. They are fricatives. Because when you do, if you notice, there's not a complete blockage. There's a narrow passage between your upper teeth and your bottom lip. The same for vi or vaca. Your upper teeth and your bottom lip close together, hissing quality. Thigh and thigh, both are dental in place of articulation, but they're also fricatives. Because if you notice, your tongue is not touching necessarily for thigh. It's not die. And actually, this is something that a lot of our Puerto Rican students do. Whenever they're learning TH, sometimes they'll produce TH as a d de dedo, d. Como die, like in thou, they'll say die, like dying. That is, instead of die, they say die, right? And there's a difference because in one of them, your tongue is actually touching your alveolar ridge for die. For the other one, your tongue is approximating the back of your teeth. So the thigh and thigh don't have complete closure. There's a narrow passage for both of them. They're fricatives. S and z are fricatives. Those are the staple hallmark examples of fricatives because they are like hissing. S, z. And then finally, shy is also a fricative. Shy is perhaps also the one that comes up if you think about hissing in a library, a librarian telling someone to shut up. Shh. That's produced with your tongue approximating the post-alveolar region, but it's not touching. So there's turbulent airstream. Does that make sense? Fricatives, turbulent airstream. See? So stops is complete air closure. Fricatives and narrow passage. And then we have approximants, which is one of our last manners of articulation. If you think about the word approximant, it's talking about a movement approximating, an approximation. So if stops is your articulators touching, fricatives is narrow passage, approximant is approaching. So it's even more open. So a lot of the times people would say that approximants are similar to vowels because they're more open in pronunciation. So they are produced by one articulator simply being close to another, but not close enough so that there's a narrow passage. There is no turbulent airflow. An example of an approximant is the y sound in English. Y as in yacht. Yacht. So if you say yacht out loud, you'll notice there's no turbulent airflow. You're not yacht, it's yacht. And it's not jot, it's not double L in Spanish. It's yacht. It's an approximant. War is another example of an approximant. My lips are coming together, and then opening. And there's also a special position of my tongue as well. It's a labial velar sound. So the front of the tongue is raised towards the palatal area, a region of the roof of the mouth. So the hard palate, but it doesn't come close enough for yacht, for yacht. So it's not a fricative. Here's a visual representation. Again, this is the vocal tract. Look at the retroflex, r. It's approaching the alveolar ridge, but it's not touching it. That means that r is also an approximant because we're not touching, it's not hissing quality, so it's an approximant. R. For ya, it's the center of my mouth. It's not close enough for it to be hissing. So it's open, it's an approximant, an approximation. For wa, it's two parts in charge. My lips coming together and then opening, and then the back of my tongue raised towards my velum. So it's more open, it's almost like a vowel. So these sounds that are not stops, are not fricatives, are called approximants in English phonetics. Wa, ra, and ya. Aproximan. Another example of a sound that approximates is the lateral, and this is an interesting sound, and it's actually a subcategory of approximants. It's a lateral approximant. And the reason why it's its own category is because if you think about it, even though laterals are open in production, your tongue is touching something in the roof of your mouth. Your tongue is touching the mid region. So there is an obstruction of air. The tongue it's in the middle. However, the air is escaping through the sides of your tongue. So that's what makes an approximant, and not a stop and not a fricative. L is an approximant and it's its own category. So notice how we said there's two L's, two U's in English. We have the clear L, which is the standard one that occurs in most positions in the beginning, in the middle. It's when your tongue is touched against the alveolar ridge. But then we have dark L that occurs at the end of a word, like pool, pool. What's happening in the dark L is that your tongue is touching the alveolar ridge, yes, but then another region of your tongue is also raised, and it's the back of your tongue. So it's kind of forming an U shaped here. So it's touching the alveolar ridge, but also approaching the back of your mouth. So that's essentially the difference between a clear L and a dark L. And for our students of Spanish or other languages, sometimes other languages don't have dark L's. So it could be challenging, or there could be variation in your English language learner when they're producing laterals. They could be producing all of them as clear. So laterals is an obstruction of the airstream somewhere in the center of the oral tract. There's an incomplete closure, so it's not a stop. The air is coming out through the sides of the mouth. If you say lie slowly, the tongue touches near the center of the alveolar ridge, but the air is coming out through the sides. No stoppage of air, so it's not a stop. No turbulent air, it's not a fricative. So then, let me see if I can clear my. There are other gestures that maybe we don't have in standard general American English that are sources of regional variation in English. So in Scotland, in Scottish English, they have a R sound, a rhotic sound that doesn't occur in standard general American English. And that sound is called a trill, okay? So a trill is similar to the double R in Spanish, perro. That R sound that occurs in Spanish occurs in varieties or versions of UK English, like Scottish English. So for instance, words like world in standard American English, in Scottish English, world. It's like adding an additional syllable, world. Girl, girl. But it's not as noticeable as I'm making it. It's a little bit more subtle, but it is girl, 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 somewhere towards the trill region, girl. So it's like a pirate. So the trill is sometimes called the roll, especially if we're talking about Spanish R, occurs in Spanish double R, but also in Scottish English. If you say rye and raw, rye, raw, that's a way of saying it in a Scottish accent. So on the count of three, I'm gonna ask you guys to read this with a trill, as if you were Scottish. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Right, right,
Right.
right.
Raw.
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 Raw,
Raw.
como la canción de Lady Gaga. No, never mind. No, no entendieron.
Raw, raw.
Exacto. Thank you. All right. So here's a small clip. Here's a small clip of Outlander. I'm gonna ask if you can hear the trill, the being r.
I'll say this for you, you look the part. A fine specimen of the local inhabitants, my lord. How am I to address you, sir?
You can call me Mackenzie if it please you. Or if we're being formal, you can call me Chief Mackenzie. Which in meet as a war and bicker leaves us ever for each other as equals, dinna you ken?
I don't know about the rest of you, but I fail to understand a single word the creature said. I believe, my lord, he was at...
Can you hear it well or not really?
It's lagging a little bit, so it breaks up.
Okay,
part.
I'm gonna share the link. It's very short, it's 35 seconds. So I'm gonna give you a minute to look at it and write down where you hear the trill. So I'm sharing the link. It's 35 seconds. Write down the words where you hear the trill. And the Scottish person in the video is the one in dark, in the dark clothes and has the sash. So that's the person you're paying attention to and the words that he's saying. All right, did you write it down? Shouldn't be that long. Informal. What do you guys have?
I put down informal.
Informal. I have to play it again, but that's a potential one. Did he say informal?
Formal.
I kind of heard war.
Yeah.
The word war.
If one of them, yeah. What else?
Error or Becker, something like that.
Big, yeah. Here's one of them, yeah.
I heard part and Lord.
Okay, yeah, what else? That's it? That's what we heard? Okay, I'm gonna play it. Play it again. I think I put closed cap subtitles. Oh, it says it's unavailable, but I'll play it again.
I'll say this for you, you look the part. A fine specimen of the local inhabitants, my lord. How am I to address you, sir?
No,
You can-
the guy in red said part. The guy in red is British. So we're paying attention to this guy in the black. So part was said in a British accent. Pot. So that's not a, eso no es la doble R. La persona, the person that's gonna say it is this guy.
You, sir?
You can call me Mackenzie if it please you.
There was like an R there, but I don't know where it was. Right.
Mackenzie if it please you. Or if we're being formal, you can call me Chief.
But if between but and if there's like an R, but if we're being formal has a R.
Mackenzie. It's in meters of war and Becker.
Meters, war and Baker. War and Baker have that double R.
Leaves us error for each other as equals, didn't you, Ken?
That's it. But yes, formal, if we're being formal, war, Baker, and there's some R's that he's introducing there that are not there. And that's actually something that happens in some accents of English. So in New York City English and Scottish English, sometimes there's an intrusive R. Meten R, like in certain dialects of English. So in this case, but he's kind of producing it like an R, but if, instead of but if. So that's interesting. So yes, trill. A trill is made by the articulator being held in place. So it's held in place. And then the airstream hits the tongue, which is the articulator, and it causes it to vibrate, but it's held in place. War, Baker. Okay, so same would be perro and all the other double R's that we have. So that's our alveolar retroflex. You can have a look at that. YouTube has a lot of interesting videos of I suppose they're for people that do speech therapy. I remember when I taught linguistics in the past to people that have experience with speech therapists, people have told me that some of the images that I share are shared in speech therapy of the articulators. And that makes sense, right? Because usually these people are dealing with individuals that have speech impediments. So if you go to YouTube, for instance, and you say, if you type articulation of retroflex, something like that, let me see if you could get their video demonstrations. Stop share. So usually there's some videos that show you movements. Look at all those lectures on places of articulation. So let me write retroflex. If you write the name alveolar retroflex, slowly. My Wi-Fi is slow. I can see my internet lagging. So sometimes there are videos here that show you movement. This side called Glossica Phonics, that's on the side, they have a lot of videos of the mouth moving and different sounds being produced. But I think that my internet is lagging or it's incredibly slow. Yeah, so my internet is incredibly slow, but I think this video, oh wait. So that video shows you more or less the movements that would happen for an R, retroflex. The air coming out, there's vibration. These are the vocal folds. This is the larynx, vocal folds, air is coming out. Retroflex is an oral sound. So that means that your nasal cavity is blocked with your velum. Air is coming out here. Your tongue is towards the alveolar ridge, and it's curled. It's curled towards that area. That's how your tongue is when you produce rye, like that. And then the air comes out, rye, see? So it's quite useful, these animated videos, because it shows you what your tongue is doing and the movements of your articulators. That's a retroflex. Salai retroflex. That's the standard American English R, not the trill. What else do we sometimes get? Another gesture that happens in dialects of American English is called the tap. Like in tapping someone, if you tap someone in the back. So for instance, between vowels, bottle, we don't say bottle, we say.
Professor, we can't see your screen.
Yes, no, yes.
No, we can't.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So tap as if you're tapping someone. So the gesture tap involves your tongue touching very lightly the roof of your mouth. And usually that region in the roof of your mouth is the alveolar ridge. So the tongue touching the alveolar ridge, one tap. And it's brief and subtle. So this sound or this movement occurs in words like pity, bottle. So it occurs in this mid position area between vowels. Pity, bottle. So if you focus and say it slowly, pity, bottle. If you whisper it, pity, bottle, you'll notice that small tap. It's not rough, it's not pity, bottle. That's UK English. It's not pity, bottle. That's Cockney English. It's a small tap, pity, bottle. So that sound, again, as well, I suppose it's a sound that it's not in our own phonology in Spanish. The closest version to this tap sound for us in Spanish would be a D, una D. Pity, bottle, maybe. Una D is a soft D. Or maybe like an R. Pity, bottle, as if it was an R. But it's somewhere between those two consonants and it's a single tap. So that's a gesture of American English, tap, pity bottle, in UK English, pity bottle. Other consonantal gestures, here we have a very important combination of sounds in English represented by these two symbols, and I'm going to discuss them. The affricates are hybrid sounds, meaning that they're a mix of sounds. So an affricate has a consonant and a fricative mixed together. So it has a stop and a fricative. Sorry. So the mixture of a stop and a fricative is the outcome. So it's a sound that starts off blocking air, and then that block is shortened by the fricative. Or maybe we can alternatively interpret. Can you hear me now? We're gonna go to a break very soon. This is the last manner of articulation, okay? So affricates are a mix. Can you hear me? Can you see a screen?
Yes.
Yes.
So affricates are a mix. They involve a stop and a fricative. So remember that a fricative is a hissing sound and it's continuous. It's continuous and it's hissing, has turbulent airflow. A stop is short. It involves blockage. So an affricate sound is a mix of a stop and a fricative together. So there are two affricates in American English. So one of the affricates is voiceless, such as the ch in church. The ch in church, that sound is the combination of a T and a long sh, a palatal alveolar. That's what the ch in church is. It's a T and a sh. Ch. This sound, we have it in our Spanish phonology, como chico. Nosotros decimos church, marchal. We don't have a problem with the existence of this ch. It exists in our phonology, ¿verdad? However, here we have a voiced affricate. Voiced affricate is the combination of do, stop, do is a stop, and zh, as in vision. That three represents the consonant in vision, in the middle of vision, or mission. Sorry, no, in vision. Vision and measure. Measure. So it's the mixture of d and j. So it's that long j is shortened because of the stop before it. So it's not j, it's j. So that j is in judge. We also have it in Puerto Rican Spanish, yo, no? So judge. It's like the Y in our own vernacular. However, having said that, let me see if I can find my drawing. Having said that, affricates are not that simple, even though we have equivalents of it in our bilingual society, even though in Spanish we have equivalents. The reason why I say this is, the reason why I say this is because a really often common mistake in Hispanic learners of English and Puerto Ricans is that they confuse the ch and the sh and sh. So beach, sometimes people will say beach. Teacher, teacher, right? Or there's other examples. Instead of she, chi, teacher, chi, right? So these two sounds, a fricative and an affricate, are often found in variation in Hispanics because their Spanish phonology doesn't have them behaving that same way. So this is a source of variation for Hispanic speakers of English, the ch and the sh. Okay, so I'm gonna stop it at here and we're gonna get a 15-minute break. 15, okay? Oh, actually, I'm gonna make it 20. 20 for food, okay? 20 for food, and we come back at, so if it's 12:17, we come back a la y 37, okay? All right, so go have food.